All right, what's up, people? I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible, but I don't think it's going to be as short. So, this is my contrast, critique, comparison, whatever you want to call it, of the respective book twos of these gentlemen's respective Satanic Bible interpretations. So, they're both obviously, Aquino basically copies LaVey's chapters or books. He does that on purpose. It's not like it's a plagiarism. It's like an homage. So the first two books were the Book of Satan, right? And I've already compared those. And I think LaVey's, even though it's plagiarized and much shorter, I think it's much more succinct and more potent than Aquino's Diabolicon, which I found to be somewhat obtuse and not really saying a whole lot. But that's just me. So I gave round one to LaVey. Now this is round two. And round two, if you look at LaVey's Satanic Bible, the OG, what you'll understand is that these are what were known as the rainbow pamphlets. And these were just little things that were distributed. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to a college campus, but they get that board. And there's more than one. They're all over the place. They're in every dorm. They're in every fucking spot you can imagine. The commons, everything. And it's just like you fucking hammer something into that motherfucker. You put a nail into that shit or a push pin or whatever the fuck, and it's like, hey, ride needed, you know? And this was back in the 60s. So LaVey had these, these pamphlets, and they were all poignant, and they were all like pointed and nice critique. This is my favorite part personally of the Satanic Bible. I think it's the, you go 2, 1, and then skip the rest. But we'll get back to 3 and 4 in another video. But basically, yeah, so I think this is the high point of LaVey's Satanic Bible. I think you could just take this part out, rename it. Rename it, like you could call it, you can just get creative with it. I'm not trying to do nothing, but we're not going to call it the Jefferson Satanic Bible or nothing like that. But no, you just pull that part out. It's a small book. That way you can charge less for it. And it's just got the kernels in there. Or just do 1 and 2. You know what I'm saying? And just take the other 2 off and just combine 1 and then make 1 a preamble to 2. Edit it a little bit better and do it. I'm telling you. Peter Gilmore, pay attention while you're, not on that piano watching your wife get fucked by her best friend. Anywho, yeah, I didn't have to throw that in there. I just did. So yeah. And then, okay, we're going to say Aquino's Book of Lucifer. Now, the way I view it is it's basically a 2-parter. So the first part is basically him. Oh, okay, 3 parts. Sorry. I forgot the preamble. The preamble is him going through LaVey's actual rainbow tracks and just like dismissing them one after another, like in a paragraph at a time. It's just like, oh, this sucked and that sucked. And it's just like, come on, man. It almost sounded like some sour grapes in the motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like LaVey had something. I mean, you might not look. You might not agree with LaVey on everything. You might find some of his workings, his personal workings, like erotic crystallization inertia or whatever the fuck that was called, the ECI. You might think that was total bullshit. But still, he was an original thinker. You know what I mean? And so to dismiss his ideas, as clever as they might be, with little paragraphs, I thought that was somewhat pretentious. But then we get into the meat of Aquino's Book of Lucifer, which is, in my opinion, it's dual. It's twofold, not dual. It's twofold. In the first part, he basically breaks down his elaborate conception of metaphysics, which he starts introducing all these fucking, like, okay, for example, he'll say something like OU, just capital O, capital U. He'll introduce it once, but then, he just keeps using it. And you have to refer back to the original, which is, it means objective universe. And then there's what's known as the SU. That's his acronym for subjective universe. And then he has something called PL, and that stands for physical law. Now, one of the things you have to really pay attention to is when you're dealing with a charlatan, a lot of times what they'll do is they use these weird techniques. And remember, Aquino got his PhD in he was one of them fucking spooks, man. He was into mind warfare, dude. This guy knows how to fucking like, they have various techniques, but the whole assigning of little letters to fucking complex concepts that are never really introduced. But because you can just tag a fucking 2-letter thing on, like objective universe, it means this, and now every time I use OU, then I have this aura of fucking like my shit makes sense. And it doesn't. So after the little, where he just shit cans LaVey's actual, rainbow pamphlets, tracks, whatever you want to call them, he just shit cans them in like a paragraph, not even a paragraph, sometimes it's like 2 sentences. And then he comes out with all this metaphysical nonsense, never justified. But then he cloaks that in a fucking like idea of what it is to be a Netaru or a divinity or something like that, a projection, And then that gets into the second part of his book of Lucifer, which is just all about like the nature of the different types of theism. And I mean, this guy thinks he's much smarter than, and he's a smart guy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was, I still remember our debates and I smashed every one of them. You know what I'm saying? He didn't know who he was dealing with. He's like, God damn, dude. But no, seriously, it's all this weird, like, okay, well, this group believes this, and this is how they're not in tune with the fucking, he creates this whole paradigm for himself that he thinks is somehow consistent. I think it's one of those things where, and this is going to be somewhat derogatory, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway. It's like, let's say you make this jigsaw puzzle, right? You make the jigsaw puzzle. What you do is you make the whole thing, and then you cut it up with a jigsaw, and then that's the puzzle. Then you dismantle it, throw it in a box. Here's the thing: imagine that the guy that was making them shits, when he had all the shit in a box, he took just one piece out and put a bum piece in from a different puzzle. Like he could be making 2 different puzzles. Like one's a unicorn over here and one's a, like a knight in shining armor over here, So you have these 2 puzzles. It's the same piece count, same relative, sizes of pieces, etc., except the cut is different, every time. So then he just takes 2 different pieces from those 2 different puzzles and swaps them. Well, now guess what you can't do? If you get one of them puzzles. It might look to be as fucking consistent as you can imagine. You know what I mean? Like, oh shit, I got all the edges. And make sure if you're doing that swap, don't take an edge piece. You got to take something from the middle of it, just to fucking fuck with them. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how I look at Michael Aquino. His system looks to be consistent, but it really isn't. It's like I'm reminded of that book. It was called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. It was what started this whole Merovingian Jesus type thing. I forget what Tom Hanks movie that was, where they pushed that shit real hard. But it started with what was called Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Bajent, Lee, and Lincoln, I believe, were the authors. And I read this book a lot when I was in my early, days of college, because it was fascinating. But then I started to notice this pattern in the way that arguments were delivered. So, for example, what you would have is you would have a hypothesis posted. Like, okay, imagine this was true. And then they'll explain the thing, but they won't give any evidence. They'll explain whatever it is they want you to think. And then they'll say, okay, now that we know that's true, what if, this? And it got to a point where it was like, okay, wait a minute, this is a house of cards. Nothing's really built on anything. But anywho, I've wasted enough of your time listening to my bullshit on this topic. Let me just